All right, what's up guys? Today we have special guest Dr. Kelly Starrett. We're going to be talking about stress fractures, the worst, as those running injuries that runners see all the time. I wanted to talk a little bit about, once the stress fracture occurs, the car's already crashed. Yeah. Right? So we got to salvage the car and get it back on the road. But then it's like, well, how do we not crash in the first place? And I wanted to dive in there and see what you had to say for us.
So good. All right. So I think conceptually, one of the things that we need to talk about first is if you go to Google and type in how stress fracture, it was like, it takes to heal. Yeah. Right? And the first thing that we think about is, we're not thinking about what caused it. What were the changes in my physiology? What's my state of training, nutrition, stress, volume changes, which we'll get into a little bit. It's all about how long you have to put up with this injury.
Right. I'm sitting on the sidelines. All my friends are playing out a recess, and this sucks. How do I get outside again?
That's right. And more importantly, any injury to a bone, whether it's a microfracture, when it's a defined stress fracture, it's either a small hairline fracture, a small fracture of the bone, or it's a bruising of the bone. So we see actually, like you can actually see on some of the imaging that the bone has some unhealthiness, it's bone bruised. And either way, we're looking at, if you just Google it in, it's 6 to 8 weeks, which is the normal physiology for, guess what? Ankle sprain, any other thing, because that's our soft tissue healing time. So, a couple things. One is that you didn't just run and get a stress fracture.
It didn't come out of nowhere. You didn't slip on a banana peel and the sun caught your eye.
No, it doesn't happen.
Stress fracture.
In fact, all of the conditions for that stress fracture had been happening for months and months and months until it became critical or got your attention.
And then all of a sudden it went.
Now it hurts so bad. So what we first want people to do is say, hey, look, you've had this thing that's happened. You've got a diagnosed stress fracture. You've talked to your physician. You've seen a radiograph, and then you've done a second radiograph. But more importantly, you put a tuning fork on that, or it's the signs and symptoms associated with stress fracture.
So what does a tuning fork do?
Well, when we see little micro hairline fractures, if you put a tuning fork, it vibrates that bone, and you will know right away that doesn't feel right. Because you put a tuning fork on a bone, you can feel it. Put a tuning fork on a bone with a little fracture, you can feel it because those little places are vibrating back.
So if you happen to be a piano teacher and a runner, and you're not sure whether or not you have stress fracture, you pull out the
all of those runners are now going to the guitar store. Excuse me, they limp in on crutches. So what we want to do is sort of conceptualize what are some of the. This is our chance for us to do some sleuthing around about our environment. Okay. So number one of the things that we see chronically in all our athletes is that most people are not getting their vitamin D checked and are actually vitamin D deficient. So if you're only outdoors for your 1 hour run and most of the time you're sneaking that in on a treadmill, chances are you're getting zero vitamin D, right? Because you're not getting enough sun exposure.
So irrespective of your running technique, your running volume, the shoes, which are all important factors we'll talk about, just your bone health in relation to vitamin D is a huge factor.
Yeah.
So how does that affect your bones? Like, what does sunshine do for people's bones?
What's amazing is we actually view vitamin D. That's right. We view vitamin D as not even a vitamin; it's a hormone. It's that powerful, and your body makes so much vitamin D, and you only need like 15 minutes of full sun exposure every day on your big parts of your body to get it. But
clothing, not clothing.
No, not clothing. Full exposure. But what we're seeing is most people do not, and unless you have a vitamin D check, which you can get from your physician, she will recommend one for you. I guarantee you're not getting enough vitamin D unless you're regularly supplementing. Now there are genetic variations where I literally have to take 15,000 units of vitamin D just to make my vitamin D go up a little bit. So
even though you live in sunny California and you get sunshine year round.
Well, we think we do, but it turns out a lot of us work indoors, right? And then during those peak sun exposure hours, we call it PTH, prime tanning hours. We're not in the sun. And a lot of us cover up more sunscreen, so we're actually not getting the sun we need.
And most of you guys are training in the early hours or after evening, so it's...
That's right. And then we're indoors. So it's an error. So one of the things we can do is say, hey, physiologically what's going on? And a lot of times we will see that these things emerge during peak training times, right? Nutrition sometimes can be an issue that we're seeing that people are under-calorie, malnourished, and stressed because we're looking at trying to maintain lean body mass as we do this. And so basically our physiology gets a little thin and something gives, right? So we want to ask, is this your first time running? So we divide these categories of stress fractures into two categories. One is, I've been running my whole life, what the heck happened? And I've just started running, right?
Okay.
So if I've just started running, then the chances are that I have maybe have this physiologic thing going underneath, stress, I'm not eating enough, I'm not doing zero.
You're just learning how to be an athlete, and you're just trying to, handle that level of stress and burden of training in general.
That's right, and maybe there's something wrong with my technique, right? Because what we're finding is, and we'll talk about that, how you land makes a huge difference on how that foot absorbs energy and transmits energy up the chain.
It's interesting, I remember I posted about this coincidentally. There was a New York Times article, and it talked about this study looking at cushioning shoes, like this newer trend of maximalist cushion shoes, and measuring the impact on runners, and basically saying that these higher level cushioning shoes aren't actually decreasing the impact on bodies at all.
They're actually increasing
They're
forces,
increasing.
because you have to strike the ground harder to find all that viscoelastic tissue, right?
Interesting.
Right, and this is one of the reasons why run cadence is 92 on hills, 94 to 96 at least.
Exactly.
We're trying to tap into the springiness, this viscoelastic properties of our ligaments, tendons, and fascia.
Yeah.
So if you're slow and
notice
plodding,
he said higher than 90. A lot of times you hear that 85 to 90 range, which is good, but that slightly higher cadence, 92, 94, 96 is even better.
that's right, and it's a skill, right? So, and we're not even looking at how you're striking. So that's why we spend a lot of time, and we should always be striving to looking at improving our running efficiency and economy, because that's technique, and this is a technical skill. Running is not just put my headphones on and run blindly, right? This is one of the most skilled things we do as human beings, and we should always be working on resolving skills. So this is, if you have a stress fracture, this is a perfect chance to think, hey, is this a mnemonic in my brain to go check my technique?
Right.
Go have someone look at my running when I do, or go back and watch my videotape running, which you're not doing already, you need to do.
Yeah, so you have this opportunity, when you do have those injuries where you can't run that much, and it's a great time to reset. I made the mistake, I think, running one of my first marathons, I think I picked up a book on running form. I'm pretty sure it was a pose running book, and all of a sudden in the middle of my 15-mile runs, I'm trying to change my technique, which is really hard to do when you're just trying to survive your training. And so a lot of times when you've decreased all that load, it's actually a nice time to revisit that technique and really set a new
That's right. And what you really just brought up, there's sort of two things. One is that we know on the beginner runner, when we ask everyone, and remember I'm a physical therapist, so I see these injuries and I say, what's changed?
Yeah.
Right? What happened? And if the person's like, I have done the same volume every single time, nothing has changed, no stress, no travel, everything is the same, then I ask, I'm like, let's look at the physiology, right? Is there a missing piece here? But oftentimes we see these injuries associated with ramp up in training volume.
Of course.
Which means maybe, one, I'm not strong enough to handle that training volume, right? And so,
one of our favorite topics
that's
right there.
Because I run, and then I know I can keep running, but my running isn't very
My legs are strong because I run a lot. What are you talking
That's right, I
about?
run hills. And then two, it's that delta in training volume, right, that we talked about. And two is when we start ramping up our speed or ramping up our mechanics, oftentimes we haven't looked at the underlying mechanics. So I was able to handle this mechanical inefficiency or compensation at sudden loads. Then the load came up and becomes the straw that breaks the camel's back. Yeah. Right? So one of the things that we're always talking about is ankle range of motion, for example. So when we look at the typical,
writing on the board.
We look at the typical, right? This is your big toe. Here's your little toe. Typically
anatomically accurate.
That's right. Here's the foot. Here's the bones. Here's, here we go. There's the heel. What we see here is that the typical stress fractures happen in these two long breaks of the wrist, right?
Yeah.
And right in the foot. So they're not in the toes, but they're in the foot here. And what ends up happening here is I think we're not realizing that as I translate over, if my ankle is stiff, for example, then one of the things that happens is as I translate over, or I'm missing this ankle range of motion, the ankle can no longer be a force absorber. My Achilles can't absorb the force because I'm missing ankle range of motion. So all of that energy gets transferred somewhere else.
In a previous video we did all about feet, we really talked about how powerful that arch is, and it sounds like when that ankle gets stiff, some of those mechanics get altered, and then all of a sudden...
Well, that energy is going to go somewhere. So what we should not be surprised about is if you...
It's going to go into the tuning fork.
That's right. If you can't, our quick test is feet together, squat all the way down. This is full ankle range of motion, yes or no. It's a blind test. Takes no requirements. This is a differential diagnostics. Ultimately, I want you to be able to get into this position But if you can even get the feet shoulder width and squat all the way down, I'm likely thinking that the ankle is not the limiting range of motion.
I see.
Right?
So this is a nice test. If you're dealing with a stress fracture or you think you have, a great quick diagnostic is to really challenge your squatting and to really look at your ankles, and the way you look at your ankles is trying to squat as narrow as possible.
That's right, and the reason is this forces my ankle into a good position, knees tracking inside the outside of the foot, which is about where I'm running as I translate
And
into
just that squat review, guys, we're not looking at this. This doesn't count for you.
No, this is a red flag just saying that, hey, I'm going around the problem. That means I'm sending energy somewhere else. So instead of energy transmitting through the joint effectively, I now have something blocked and I'm sending more energy into a system that can't handle that energy.
If people are looking at their running, now that we're kind of talking about your foot and your foot strike, like what are some of the big things you look at that, if someone was, setting up their iPhone on a treadmill, like on the front or to the side, like some things could they look at that would be like telltale indicators?
Well, remember, the idea here is that I've become injured somehow, can't handle the volume of training, so what is it about the system that put enough energy in there? So maybe I have a physiological deficiency. The second piece is this big mechanics black hole. And one of the big things is that when you strike, when you're running, everything should be going straight up and down. And when I see any variation of the foot circling, right, or someone overstriding and landing like this, if you're landing and the foot is rolling across, when the foot comes down, it should just come down, right? This is what happens. And anytime I'm seeing the foot come down sideways, think about the amount of torsion force, the rotation and twisting that's happening in the foot. So if I'm not landing, this is what my running should look like, ostensibly when I'm jumping and landing, right? That's what it is. I'm falling, I'm pulling, if you use that language, right? It's a polarized language. I'm scratching the ground, whatever language doesn't affect you. Right, that's right. So the idea here, though, is your jump roping mechanic is what your foot should look like when it hits the ground. And if you're jump roping your foot out and you're adding this torsion, imagine if I'm pulling on duct tape, that duct tape is strong. Yeah. If I add torsion to that duct tape, that's how I tear it. So suddenly, if I'm striking the ground and seeing a big roll out, and we see even people who are trying to run the ball with their foot who are missing extension. If you're missing the ability to extend the hip, you're going to make up for that in front. So we see people reaching for the ground, and they roll radically across.
So this becomes very important because when we start looking at what's going on down here to figure out what's going on with the foot, we can't just kind of like change where a foot hits the ground without maybe addressing further things up.
In fact, as you know, that's why we do so many warm-up drills and running drills. And the other reason that we've got to be in the gym lunging and squatting at the very least, so those are the end ranges of bookmark or function for running mechanics.
So when it starts to go into that conversation about what does it mean to be strong as a runner, what does it mean to be strong enough to survive my 16-week progressive run program, I need to have this range of motion just to be able to survive.
That's right. So if we're talking about, ankles a biggie, right? But also the thing is we see that athletes can't come up onto their toes like this. So I should be able to have a nice 90 degrees in my big toe. So no problem getting my toe to 90 degrees or past 90 here. And the idea here is if my big toe is stiff to this plantar fascia,
right,
and this is expressed because when I translate forward over my foot in stance, then this toe lines up and the whole foot becomes mechanically stable. But once again, if this toe is stiff and I can't do this closed, then that energy is going to get transmitted again up the chain. It goes right to one of those little tiny bones.
Your foot's going to do something funky.
That's right. Or I'm what we call over-tension. The system is just mechanically so rigid and stiff that I end up translating a lot of energy right in the middle of that bone. And those little tiny rays, these things are part of an important system, but if I'm they're doing the lion's share of force absorbing instead of the whole system absorbing force, then we have a problem.
That becomes a problem. So that's great. So we've talked about a few different key things thus far. We talked about vitamin D levels and say, hey, maybe that's for you that sounds more of a physiological issue. And then the other issues we talked about more are a mechanical standpoint. How are my run mechanics? And then that gets into range of motion, mobility, and strength and capacity in those ranges.
So then people are like, well, what do I do?
Exactly. What can these guys do at home with this information?
So there's a couple things we want to think of. This is a chance to take a bigger view, look at your lifestyle, right? So we have the physiology of those pieces. But one of the things I unequivocally can tell you is that if you're in a stress state, cortisol is high, this is a big deal. You have to be getting, wait for it, if you're training for a marathon, at least 8 hours of sleep. Our marathon
I'm already failing.
Olympians,
Okay.
it's 10 hours. I just did a podcast with a powerlifting friend of ours named Chris Duffin, who deadlifts over 900 regularly, like once a week. He's like, oh, 8 hours, that's a nap. You know, and what we're seeing is that a lot of our runners are making the error around not getting enough sleep, still working on my runs, right? So, and then when they run afterwards, we're not doing a good job of creating a healthy tissue environment.
Yeah.
So compression, I'm going to put sleep on here, and I'm going to mention compression for a couple reasons. One is that if you've already injured a bone, have a bony bruise or a fracture, think about the associated swelling and trauma in that area, because we're looking at the bone, but the whole area has been traumatized.
What about running in compression socks versus wearing, because I know you have a few different compression tricks up your sleeve. What are you a bigger fan of? Because I know that with runners right now that compression socks are very popular, and you see a lot of them out there wearing it on course, but this sounds like something they're doing not while training.
That's right. I'm more of a big fan of, hey, I don't think we need to wear compression unless we're going really long, and I know my body's going to start swelling and recovering. I need to manage that space. So ultras, 50Ks, these
I'm
are
already starting to recover while I'm still.
That's what happens. Absolutely, it starts to happen. Anytime you're vast, 6 hours, 5 hours, even so we're trying to limit that swelling space. So my adventure racer friends, world champions, had to wear compression socks because they run and then change events, and their feet would swell up and they couldn't start running again.
Right.
So whether you want to run compression or not, I think compression needs to be a big part of this. And one of the reasons is that most of us are running but not moving around enough during the day. We go back to our sedentary lifestyle, our job, and what ends up happening is we're not evacuating a lot of the congestion from the areas of the foot. And it's that muscle contraction from constant motion that pumps up the lymphatics. So if I sit down, basically all the musculature that drives this de-swelling mechanisms stagnates, and then I create a really unhealthy tissue, an unhealthy foot. Minimizing that swelling space can be a big deal and make a massive difference. So if you're done with your run and you're not going to be able to keep walking around, throw some compression socks on. It's a massive difference. But now since you're swollen, let's go ahead and make sure that we've got some compression socks on to support that space. Because if my foot remains swollen in a swollen state in these small areas, I'm never going to get the level of bone healing that I'm after, because the whole system is unhealthy.
Yeah, which basically means it's going to take longer for me to return back from that stress fracture, and then also even if I'm training, it's going to make it that much harder to hit tomorrow's run.
That's right. I see big errors in warm-up associated with stress fractures.
Oh, you mean this? Like run warm up right here?
Ready, and well, I go slow for the first 5 minutes. So what I'll tell you is that if you've had a stress fracture, one-to-one, you are not warming up effectively. And unfortunately, the way we're timing, we're not giving our
Can you say that again, please?
You have to warm up running.
Thank you.
If the old heart rate monitor book, one of the first ones that came out, said if you have a half hour to run, 15 minutes is warming up, 15 minutes is cooling down. You actually don't have any time to run, right? And I was like, oh my God, where am I going to run? I can only run for a half hour up this hill. So what we're seeing is that you're not bringing your tissues up to temperature, you're not letting the tissues perfuse, you're not working on your technique. The cool down is important, but you can keep moving through the day and cool down. But you can want some compression, keep on your feet, keep moving. But this warm up is a big deal. It's a red flag. If you've injured yourself, I guarantee you, one-to-one, when we ask the questions, people aren't warming up.
Again, guys, we've got tons of warm up videos on everything from as silly as arm swings and leg swings to a little bit more in depth. So if you're curious about what those warm ups are, that's a little tip of the iceberg.
That's right. So we've got sleep, we've got compression, we've got warm up. The other piece around this is thinking, hey, I can work on the mechanics of the system. So one of the things we want to do is stay in this pain-free area. So if you're working on your ankle range of motion or soft tissue around upstream and downstream, just make sure that your localized site doesn't hurt.
And just upstream and downstream, for these guys who aren't familiar.
Ankle, leg, calf, this is your chance to think, hey, I'm going to feed some slack to that area.
Above and below the issue.
And I have literally seen people with stress fractures, because remember, that fracture happens within context of moving tissues. We feed enough slack forward to it, start to address these things. The stress fracture becomes less symptomatic, it doesn't hurt anymore, even though it's still there, and so we can kind of keep training a little bit, right? So what we're thinking is, hey, something's going on. Literally when we see stress fractures, we see cortical bone swelling that's been going on for months, and then it finally breaks. So we're thinking we can feed some slack to it and maybe train through, right?
Yes.
So one of the other things, so we're going to improve ankle range of motion, foot, soft tissue health, but this is also a time to remain mechanically intact or physiologically intact. So suddenly you're going to be sprinting on the exercise bike like it's your job. And I want to keep positive aerobic input in to this physiologic lung heart system.
Just because you have a foot that's rebelling doesn't mean that you don't get to be an athlete.
No, you should be like, oh my God, the work has just begun because I'm so efficient at running and I love it, but now I'm on this assault bike. You know, for us, if you're injured, we recommend an assault bike.
Okay.
And
An assault bike is basically a
Schwinn air
fan. And
Yes.
It's got the little.
And it sucks. And we call it low skill, high physiology. And the idea here is that we can keep you metabolically intact. So as this is healing and you start to run again, we've kept the engine going, right? And this is a big deal. So
That is a really big deal. Just being able to maintain some level of, sometimes we call this cross training, but I really like what you're calling it here because it really puts the emphasis more to greater health overall. It's, sometimes with cross training, we only relegate it to when it's a problem.
That's right.
I'm only going to do this if I can, and then I'm going to return back to this less than ideal way of performing that got me in trouble in the first place. And it sounds like even if you're healthy, you'd want to include some of this all the time.
well, one of the reasons we want to include squatting, deadlifting, because it makes the whole system more robust. You know, if running's a sport, how are you training for your sport, right? There are very few sports where you're just like, good luck, kids, go scrimmage. And that's literally what we do when we go run. We are scrimmaging, but we're not building in the technique or drills that we did even in high school, like high school basketball, football, or whatever, swimming. You just did so many drills, and if you were lucky, the coach was like, go ahead and play in soccer now. Right?
Even
So
if you were half asleep doing karaoke.
it doesn't matter. It's still part of the drill. I used to tell my coach, I'm like, I come pre-stretch, coach. Like, you know, and he was like, you are an idiot. And I was like, no, I'm pre-stretch.
I stretched last night.
So we have a chance that, you know, a lot of times we see these stress fractures aren't painful with squatting or deadlifting. Keep my foot flat on the ground. I can work on some of these deficiencies, right? I've never seen someone's foot hurt doing strict pull-ups, for example, right? Or push-ups, right?
Or working on that upper body.
It's weird how that works. So
there's really always something that you can work on with your limited time to train, and if your foot is bothering you in this respect,
that's right.
it really opens things up.
So if you have a stress fracture, we want you to get a blood test, first and foremost. We want you to improve your mechanics on the ankle. We want to keep you metabolically intact. Look at sleep, look at warm-up, look at some of the environmental pieces. Be honest with yourself. Were you burning the candle at both ends and in the middle? Because the chances are you were. This is a downstream effect. So chance to really look at your running technique.
Yeah.
Has there been a spike in volume or a change in technique? Right? Because all of a sudden you take your huge aerobic engine that you've developed for the last 20 years, then you're like, I'm going 5 and 5 figures, I'm gonna run this marathon barefoot, woo, stress fracture, right? And you don't have a system, right? You don't have a system that is with you know, can absorb that. When we ask our athletes with stress fractures the only time we don't find check the boxes, they're like, something fell on my foot.
I got hit by a taxi cab.
That is the only time. Every other time, we look at the stress fracture as what we call a predictable, preventable disease.
Predictable, preventable disease. Really like that. And you know, that really ties into some things that, you know, we like to say, whereas, you know, higher mileage in marathon training, it's become so normal these days, but just because it's normal doesn't mean it's a right. This training is a privilege.
Yeah,
right?
big time.
You know, if I'm in the gym and I'm going underneath that heavy bar, I have to earn my right to get underneath that thing, and just the same thing with this running. So what do we got there?
This stands for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And it's worth talking about for a second that aspirin, that ibuprofen, that Aleve,
that I've probably been taking for a little while because something.
Or I'm so sore, or my foot hurts. This has been shown clinically to limit bone healing.
Interesting.
So one of the things that's happening is, remember, our bones are constantly turning over, and I just have to finish on this idea that if we're sore and pain, that tells me about my biomechanical efficiency, and I don't want to blunt that. So I'm not talking about I'm going to get through this race, you know, and I'm going to take this out. That's your big boy, big girl, make a decision about getting through the race. But what we often find is when we ask about this non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, people are like, yeah, I take ibuprofen, so I run, because my foot hurts so bad. And we're like, so not only has your foot hurt for a long time, you've been getting this cue that your foot was aching and swollen, but then you've also been taking a drug to block the inflammatory response, which is your natural healing mechanism for the bone, and we know unequivocally it stops bone health. Like, this is one of the reasons physicians will not prescribe these things after after surgeries. because it limits this healing response. Instead, compression, movement, always active, all of these things.
Well, Kelly, thanks again so much. Guys, if you like this video, go ahead and let me know. Hit that like button. If you have any comments or questions, we talked about a lot today. Hit us up in the comment section. Definitely subscribe to our channel. We got more great videos on injury prevention and strength training and run technique. A lot of things we talked today. And if you have or you want a free gift on injury prevention training, we got a little something for you. All you need to do is click this box in the corner. If you happen to be on your mobile device, don't worry. There's an identical logo down in the description. And it's just going to take you to a site. All you need to do is enter your name, your email address. I'll be able to personally email you that little training. Once again, thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Pleasure.